Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai disappeared. Then the world started asking where she was. And that's causing a big problem for the Chinese Communist Party. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Before we begin, in case you haven't heard, we now have China Uncensored merchandise. If you'd like to buy a t-shirt like this or some of our other great t-shirts and mugs, check out chinauncensored.tv/merchandise. Get some cool stuff and support the show. And the best part is, it's not made in China. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people disappear in China. They disappear into prisons and detention centers, concentration camps, re-education centers, black jails, and house arrest. Occasionally, someone disappears in a way that attracts attention. Enough attention to cause a problem for the Chinese Communist Party. That's what happened to tennis star and former Olympic athlete Peng Shuai. I told you several weeks ago about how Peng accused a former top leader of sexual assault. That leader was former Vice Premier Zhang Gaoli. He was a member of the Politburo Standing Committee, the small group of men at the top level of the Communist Party. And like I said earlier, Zhang is also a member of former leader and shriveled toad Jiang Zemin's political faction. Peng accused Zhang of forcing her to have sex in 2018. That's after he had already retired from the Standing Committee, but it was still an incredibly politically sensitive accusation. So sensitive that her original post on Chinese social media platform Weibo was quickly censored. Peng's name and even the word tennis has been censored on the Chinese internet. After her accusation, Peng then disappeared from public view for weeks. And then people started asking, where is Peng Shuai? Including the Women's Tennis Association, the WTA. The WTA even went further, calling for a full and transparent investigation into Peng's sexual assault allegations, and even threatened to completely pull out of China. And huge tennis stars started speaking out about Peng Shuai, from Naomi Osaka to Serena Williams, to Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. I have to say, when people talk about why the NBA really needs China, and how the NFL is scrambling for attention from China, not to mention the Olympics being held in China again, I didn't expect tennis to be the sport to take a stand against the Chinese Communist Party. Although, to be fair, tennis players do have a lot of balls. But it's nice to see an organization like the WTA actually say they'd be willing to pull out of China, even if it costs them millions. And the story of Peng Shuai's disappearance landed on front pages around the world. People called for a boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics, including NBA player Enes Kanter. Even the White House called for an investigation into Peng Shuai's allegations. In response, the Chinese regime's propaganda machine set out to reassure the world that Peng Shuai was just fine, thank you. And the results were hilarious, in a deeply disturbing way. I'll show you why after the break. Welcome back. The Chinese Communist Party probably didn't expect the world to pay much attention to Peng Shuai's disappearance. But when it did, they went into full damage control mode. First, state-run CGTN published an email allegedly from Peng to the head of the WTA, saying she's not missing or unsafe, she's just resting. Oh, and those sexual assault allegations aren't true either. These sexual assault allegations she had posted on her own social media account, totally not true. Yep, Peng Shuai is fine. She's just resting, pining for the fjords. When the CGTN email failed to convince anyone, a state-run media worker posted photos of Peng Shuai that were supposedly from her WeChat account. The third photo in particular attracted a lot of attention, since she's holding a Kung Fu Panda in front of a photo of her with Winnie the Pooh. What does that mean? But even that failed to reassure people for some reason. So next, Hu Xijin, the editor-in-chief of my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, started posting videos of Peng Shuai having dinner in a restaurant. In the first video, people mentioned the date out loud, as you do when eating dinner. In the second video, the date is written on the door, which is a normal thing restaurants do. I'm just surprised Hu Xijin didn't show a picture of Peng Shuai reading the newspaper too. But the next day, Hu did post videos of Peng Shuai signing autographs at a youth tennis match. See, there she is, smiling, in public. If anyone is still worried about Peng's safety, it's clearly because they are dark, twisted people who live in terrible countries. It has nothing at all to do with the Chinese regime's long history of disappearing and reappearing people. And finally, the president of the International Olympic Committee was able to have a video call with Peng, and she was fine. Look at her, smiling. Clearly nothing is wrong. Now, why did Peng have a call with the IOC and not the WTA, which has been demanding all along to be able to talk directly to her? Is it because the IOC definitely wants to hold the Olympics in Beijing in a few months and therefore won't ask any awkward questions like, were you sexually assaulted? But in many ways, the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda backfired. Because the more they insisted Peng was doing great, the more people had questions about whether she really was. More after the break. Welcome back. After a global outcry over Peng Shuai's disappearance, the Chinese Communist Party has responded with a highly orchestrated campaign to show Peng Shuai is safe and free. It's not the first time they've done something like this either. It's a familiar pattern. The Chinese regime has a long history of silencing high-profile dissenters and erasing inconvenient truths, then forcing the oppressed to appear on video to recant allegations, admit to crimes, or tell the public that they are safe and well. Peng's reappearance under pressure shows the Chinese Communist Party has her under control, as it's called in Chinese. She's complying. There's just no way to know whether Peng Shuai is actually safe and well. That's the way the system is set up. Even if Peng left China, the Communist Party could threaten her friends and relatives to silence her. We've talked to many Chinese dissidents who have been threatened exactly like that. One sign that Peng's not actually free? News about her is still incredibly censored in China. Despite the outpouring of concern about Ms. Peng's well-being on Twitter and other online platforms that are blocked in China, the Chinese public has little knowledge of the discussions. Chinese state-run media has been doing a huge propaganda push about Peng, but it's all on Twitter, which means it's for foreigners, not Chinese people inside China, where Twitter is blocked. As some have pointed out, the party's ham-handed propaganda messaging is not actually about convincing people, which is good for them because they're terrible at that. In a way, their terrible propaganda is actually a demonstration of the power of the state. It especially works inside China. Chinese people know the party isn't telling them the truth, but they're too afraid to say anything. Unfortunately for the Communist Party, it doesn't work as well outside China, where people haven't been totally intimidated by the Chinese regime. But they're working on it. Peng Shuai is not the only high-profile disappearance and reappearance recently. Last year, Chinese billionaire Jack Ma disappeared for 3 months after he made a speech criticizing government regulation. Over the summer, Chinese actress Jia Wei was scrubbed from the Chinese internet, and she's barely been seen since. But these are all people whose disappearances were noticed on the world stage. Like I said earlier, there are hundreds of thousands of people who disappear in China each year. Peng Shuai is much luckier than them. Although her sexual assault allegation against Zhang Gaoli will probably never be investigated, unless Chinese leader Xi Jinping needs to get rid of Zhang for some reason. But Peng is probably protected from being imprisoned by the fact that the rest of the world is paying attention to whether she's okay. That's something most people in China don't have. After their propaganda campaign backfired, the Chinese Communist Party is now focusing on changing the narrative. They're deflecting Peng's original sexual assault accusation and instead making it about foreign governments maliciously hyping up the issue. Look at all those mean foreign countries using Peng Shuai to attack poor, defenseless China. Let's all remember who the real victim is here, people. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a fan who supports China Uncensored on the crowdfunding website Patreon or the subscription community Locals. Timuka Venables asks, my question is, do you think that looking back, the CCP will regret their sledgehammer to crack a walnut approach with Hong Kong, as it ultimately has meant that people can see them for what they really are, don't keep their word, don't respect international treaties they themselves proposed, and that they can't try and sell one country, two systems as a viable option for Taiwan anymore? Great question, Timuka. What you said about the results of the Chinese Communist Party's sledgehammer approach is absolutely right. Their treatment of Hong Kong has opened many people's eyes. And it's also gotten governments around the world to stand up to the Communist Party. And as Shelley, Matt, and I found out when we traveled to Taiwan to cover the presidential election in January 2020, what happened in Hong Kong definitely affected how people voted. So the Chinese Communist Party did gain control over Hong Kong, but it backfired in many ways. So do they regret it, Timuka? Well, if the party had to do it all over again, they would do the exact same thing. They have to. Their system prioritizes control over everything else. After millions marched in the street against their rule, the Communist Party saw Hong Kong as a threat. They could not tolerate leaving Hong Kong free, no matter how bad the damage to their reputation, no matter how negatively it affected their global ambitions. They had to control Hong Kong above all. In a way, it's similar to what we've been talking about with how they disappear people. Wouldn't it be better for them to just stop controlling Peng Shuai instead of doubling down on this ham-fisted propaganda showing she's totally fine? But this is the only way the party can handle it. The Chinese Communist Party can never back down. They think that would make them weak and undermine their rule. That's why they would rather shoot people in the streets of Beijing than agree to political reform. Thanks for your question, Timuka, and thanks for supporting China Uncensored. And if you'd like to have me answer your question on the show, join us on Patreon or Locals. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.